Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we're going to continue our No Capes Festival with the 2017 film My Friend Dahmer.
Let's dive on in.
Woo! Cannibals!
Oh my god. All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Pulcher.
And if you like what you see /here, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people do what?
Find good media.
That's right, they certainly do. And obviously, as you can tell, we're going to do a really sensitive take on the crimes of Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer. No, actually...
Yeah, how he got to those crimes.
How he got to those
Pretty
crimes.
Interesting stuff.
Very interesting stuff. Now, this is based on a graphic novel written by John Backderf. Now, if you saw his style of artwork... You would remember him from the long-running syndicated comic strip called The City, which appeared in basically every in Salt Lake City Weekly, but up in Seattle it's The Stranger. But if you saw his comic strip, you'd be like, oh yes, I've seen this thing a bajillion times.
Yeah, I was kind of just surprised that they had made a graphic novel. I'd seen this movie before, but I had no idea it was based on a graphic novel. And there's nothing about the movie specifically that would make me think that, right? I guess to a degree. And it's kind of a fascinating take on kind of that perspective of a serial killer's life drawn out. That's really interesting. Now I've read his father, My Father's Story, the book that his Jeffrey Dahmer's dad,
Lionel Dahmer, wrote,
who is portrayed here a little bit in the movie. But I've read that, but I wanted to get a little bit because you chose this one, and I wanted to know kind of why you wanted it as part of this festival and kind of how the comic compares.
So John Backderf, who in his comic name is Derf Backderf because everybody just calls him Derf.
Gotcha.
And really about a decade ago,
so he's Derf in the movie.
So Alex Wolff's character, that's
John
Backderf. I mean, that's who he's playing. So
that's
when
the guy
he's
who made the comic,
doing all the drawings, and he's like, "Look,
Okay.
it's Dahmer as a coat hanger. Look, it's Dahmer as a scarecrow." Those were all things he was really doing at the time, and a lot of those drawings are in the final graphic novel.
That closed a loop that I didn't see.
Yep.
And wow, that makes things so much more interesting.
Based on a 100% true story.
Yeah, they shot in his actual
house,
childhood home.
Wow, right? I mean, apparently it was really hard for the actors.
Yeah. Holy cow.
But so John Backderf about a decade ago decided to start trying his hand at making actual full book-size graphic novels rather than just doing his comic strip. His first one is called Punk Rock and Trailer Parks, I believe, which is sort of a half true story, half made up character that he sort of embodies. That's this roadie for the Ramones and roadie and kind of doing the local show version of things that happen in Kent, Ohio, which is where John Backderf grew up.
Yeah.
And so he did Punk Rock and Trailer Parks, then he did My Friend Dahmer, and then he has a new book that just came out that I think already won the Eisner, which is the highest. I guess the highest level that comic book has won was the Pulitzer for Art Spiegelman's Mouse. But the next one down from that is the Eisner, which is obviously from Will Eisner. And the one he just did was about the Kent State Massacre, where all of the National Guard, I believe it was in the 70s, opened fire on student protesters in Kent, Ohio. And so he did a graphic novel about that. So he's really branching out and into doing more serious stuff, but sort of his transition to more serious stuff was this story based on his actual experience in high school.
This is not serious at all. It's a laugh riot.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, and
Easy transition.
And I'm glad that you mentioned Lionel Dahmer's book,
very effective.
A Father's Story, because there is, and I didn't know, I tried looking up to see if there was research that when, obviously this is from his, from Derf's own perspective.
I was going to ask
but there's all this in the home stuff that I'm like, when he was writing it, did he look at a father's story to get research? Because my God,
no, I agree with you. Yeah,
all the stuff with Anne Heche,
that earlier, I was like, did he had that perspective, or is that just what Jeff told him?
Hey everybody, it's Sherlock on the edit. I just wanted to mention that I looked through the notes at the end of the graphic novel and found that Backderf did use Lionel Dahmer's book for some of the research that went into the scenes that took place in Jeff's home. His take on Lionel Dahmer's point of view at this period of time is really interesting. Quote, "The problem with Lionel's book is that its clarity comes in hindsight. Lionel, during the period covered in My Friend Dahmer, noted very little amiss with his son outside of some social difficulties that concerned him and an overall lack of purpose. He didn't know about his son's binge drinking, the roadkill, his bizarre behavior, or the fake fits that imitated his mother's nervous episodes. To Lionel, his son was, incredibly, a normal teen. Therefore, a father's story is a list of what Lionel didn't know. As such, it is the best example of the adult obliviousness that Jeff so effectively exploited, first as a youth and later as a butcher. My Friend Dahmer, on the other hand, recounts what my friends and I did know." Because obviously there are parts in the graphic novel. This stays incredibly true to the graphic novel, almost beat for beat.
Sure.
Obviously, there's some things.
So Marc Meyers, how is he? He's the writer and the director of this film. How is he involved with Derf? Is it just kind of just a happenstance relationship?
Yeah, I think they just optioned. I don't know for sure, but I think that they just optioned it, and he ended up being the director. But I mean, he really pulls page from page these experiences that happen in the graphic novel. Wow. And with the only exception being that the end of the graphic novel has a bumper which wouldn't belong here. That is basically when Dahmer was arrested for his crimes, somebody called him and said, "Holy shit, you know who just got arrested for murdering a bunch of people?" And the first word out of his mouth was not Dahmer, but the stoner that's like cutting himself with a knife and is all weirdo with playing with a gun, long hair guy with the army jacket. That that was the first name he said, and they're like, "No, Dahmer," and he's like, "What?" And that's the very end of the book.
Wow.
Right, which sort of leads to him. Actually, he did a couple of short comic strips way back when all this shit actually happened in the 90s.
Sure.
That were basically an early sketch of what would become the graphic novel.
Interesting. I wonder, so I kind of like that this movie's kind of low budge a little bit. Like, it's kind of an indie thing. There's not really necessarily an A-list star here. Ross Lynch, who plays Dahmer, so spot on here. He's just some like Disney Channel kid.
I know, something. He's some like pop singer Disney kid.
I've never seen him before.
So good here.
Yeah,
My
he's
God.
Excellent. I'm sure. I mean, he seemed like he got pretty method with it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you have to be. What is those kind of more B version, where there's Gacy and Dahmer. Who played Dahmer? Was it?
It was
Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, it was Renner.
That was
yeah,
like
Jeremy
one of his
Renner.
first like breakout movies.
And he actually does it's not a great movie, but he does a really good job in it.
Great. Yeah, I agree.
Like if you know about Jeffrey Dahmer as this fairly well-known, territory about how his mother was obviously had lots and lots of psychological, psychiatric issues. Anne Heche does such a spooky version.
Yeah, she's
incredible.
Great. But this whole movie is like the foreshadowing here of so much shit, like a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
and like in that scene specifically where it's like you don't really know this family yet, and it seems like a normal, pretty family scene. The little brother doesn't say much, and Heche hasn't seen that crazy yet.
Yeah,
and the dad just seems like he's just trying to hold it all together. Just doesn't know what's going on. But you get him carrying around dead cats, and he's interested in bones, and his dad's a chemist, right? And throughout he's just kind of building these traits that we know what he ends up coming into. But his mom at that thing says, "We eat our mistakes," because she didn't fully cook the chicken or something. Oh, God,
the chicken's still bloody
and I'm
inside.
Like, oh, come on, that's just a little too
on the nose.
I didn't even catch that.
We eat our mistakes.
Yeah.
fuck. I didn't even catch that. You're totally
but
right.
Then, of course, you have this stuff that's maybe a little more obvious where he's putting, he when that stoner kid tries to sell him some weed and he says, no, I just pick up roadkill, but I'm trying to quit.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the few funny lines in the movie.
Well, and
that's like his thing in the chemist side, so he can get these acids and store them in this little shack. You could see those are some of the more obvious things, creeping at runners and that kind of stuff is all there, and can see how it could turn into something way more crazy.
Well, and even down to when they go out of town and they're on, I mean, I'm jumping around, but they go to DC and he has to share a room with the one black student where we know that all of Dahmer's victims later on were all exclusively young black men.
Oh, they were.
Mm-hmm. And so when he says, I wonder if your insides are black.
Are the same as mine.
Mine, you're like, oh boy, this is definitely... No, I guess not all of his victims, because his first victim wasn't. I think once he moved to Cleveland... Mm-hmm. Is that right? Cleveland? I think that's right. Where he committed most of his murders, they were almost exclusively against young black men.
It's pretty interesting how they treat his sexuality in this movie, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think there's obviously some homosexual tendencies there. But, he also gets really offended when his friends say, there's not a girl within 50 yards of this place that would go out with Dahmer.
Right, he makes a concerted effort
to make a point. Right?
Yeah, well, and I think that there is this
I think
obviously
it also shows his charm of being able to talk people into shit too, right?
Totally, and it's like he can put on this mask, but it only lasts for a certain amount of time before he gets bored of it, right? Sure. Which is one thing that they do say about a lot of psychopaths is that they have a penchant for boredom, right, with normal things, like they want to continue into their weird activities. Yeah. And he does have this obsession with a jogger, one particular man. That's the very beginning of the movie, who ends up being a local doctor, and that later in the movie he fantasizes about laying in bed with that doctor, but he's dead. Yeah. Right.
I thought we were going to wait to get to that scene, but no, that was one of the more haunting scenes. And almost kind of like an obvious reveal that you're maybe waiting for in a movie like this.
Yeah, totally.
And it's really the only time they go there, and it's super brief.
But I think
we really don't see him do much to a human.
Well, and I think that one of the things that's interesting to think about, and the reason why I jumped to it so quickly is you were talking about his sexuality. We do see that one of the few friends that Dahmer has before his Dahmer fan club emerges with Derf and his group of friends is a young gay man, right? Who's obviously not out, but high school boys have a definite radar for, oh, that kid's gay, even in the 70s, to be like, calling him all these horrible derogatory names and beating him up and all this stuff. And so he sees it. He isn't, he's a bad friend, right? Where he's like, hey, Jeffrey, I got those Neil Sedaka tickets. And he's like, I gotta go, right? Yeah. He's not going to help him out or anything because he himself knows deep down, like, oh, I'm not straight. I don't know what I am, but I know I'm not straight. And so the last thing I want to do is shine that light on myself. Now, what's interesting is, he's been percolating on these thoughts and these desires for long enough that by this point, knowing that he is not heterosexual, but also not being able to accept the fact that is gay, what he's resorted to is, well, I can have my sexual fantasy as long as that other person's dead. And he talks about this later in interviews after he was arrested, right? And that was the thing that was the most important to him, was like, just have that person there and they can't leave, right? And so their body is there. So he breached whatever that level was from living being to dead being, right? Yes. Really early before he had even killed anybody. And so if they're dead, they're no longer any harm to him, right? And so seeing him fantasize the doctor as being dead, and that's what his fantasy was, not of him being alive and having a romantic affair with the doctor, makes you go, my God, this is already so steeped. Yeah. Even before.
Yeah. He does get a boner in the checkup, though.
It's so uncomfortable.
Which is actually it's super uncomfortable, but he's so embarrassed by it that it's like a switch that kind of
yeah, like, oh, this could never happen.
Like, yeah, like just trying to confront this in real life.
Yeah.
It's way easier if they're dead. So I don't know. There's a lot of things that you can kind of see where his demeanor changes, and that's one example. Yeah. Another example is when his dad takes he takes the his little shack away.
Yeah.
Right at the near the beginning with all of the animals and jars and stuff like that, and he locks it up and he wants to tear it down and all this stuff, and you can see that there's a switch that goes off. He doesn't have that outlet anymore. So what does he start doing? He starts acting out in school, right? Yep. And doing the spaz thing in the hallways.
It immediately switches over to that. Yep.
And it's really interesting. It made me think of like, it was always there, but this one thing made it change. I'm thinking of when Benny's video, the Michael Haneke movie, where he's doing all of this horrible shit, but people don't start to notice until he shaves his head, right?
Like, that his outward appearance has somehow manifested all these. Oh, that's such an interesting point. I didn't even think about that. But you're absolutely right. And I think that it's you think about the idea of antisocial behavior, right? And the way that someone who is a psychopath will get a thrill from antisocial behavior. And not even that antisocial behavior necessarily needs to be anything that other people are witnessing, but maybe you yourself know, I'm not supposed to be doing this, right? And so the dissolving the roadkill, later on he tries to lure a dog, all these different things. That's a rough one. We'll get back to it. But he tries to do all these different things, and you think this is this outlet for him that probably allows the temperature to cool back down because he's done this antisocial thing. And as you're saying, once Lionel says the shack is done, the shack is gone.
He buys him some free weights, though.
He buys him the free. Oh God, you just feel so bad. And I don't know who that actor is that played the father.
I know he's in a few things.
He's in a few things,
he's a
but
little familiar about it.
Boy, if they ever do a biopic of John Ritter,
totally.
He should be that guy because he just he has this sad desperation in him, and he even says at one point, and this is another reason why I'm wondering if the Lionel Dahmer book made any play, even though I couldn't find anything about it, into anything in this movie or in the original graphic novel, is that he says to me, he's like, Jeffrey, when I get mad at you, it's because I can see myself, which again echoes back to Road to Perdition.
It's funny,
which we just talked about. But he talks about that in the book, right? That I think Lionel Dahmer says that when he was a teenager, he had a penchant for lighting fires, right? And he got in trouble for it as a teenager. And he kind of admits that in his own autobiography. Like, I worried about Jeff because I could see, there were these things in me. And then my wife, who's a complete nut job.
Seeing UFOs and stuff.
Yeah, just mixing those two parts of the brain together, he was super worried.
Yeah. It's a fascinating read for anyone who wants to dive deeper into
It's
this.
very sad,
and I know true crime shit is definitely all the rage these days, and probably will be for a while. But it's a fascinating take overall as a movie. What do you think of this movie? We haven't really talked about the movie as a whole here. Just the way it's directed, the adaptation from the comic.
I think that the movie does such a brilliant job. I've thought about this a lot. I think the movie does first of all, the movie is directed incredibly competently. It looks gorgeous. I think that for
it's
movie...
It's a period piece too, right?
It's a period piece, 78. Okay. I think that all the period piece stuff in it hits perfectly. Yeah. I love these long shots of the road that he has to walk across to get to the school bus, and just how lonely it feels, even though it's lush and beautiful. It also feels very, very lonely. And we spend so much time with Dahmer by himself, with there being no dialogue and even very little music, that we're just watching this actor act. And that this giant asterisk next to the name of what this guy did.
Yeah.
We barely need to even show you anything grotesque, because ahead of time the asterisk is there and we know, right? And that allows us what?
You said ahead of time.
Well, okay. But we know that about we know that, right? So it's loaded from the beginning. It doesn't need to do a lot. But the part that fascinated me the most, and I want to talk about this with you, is the movie, the graphic novel did this to some extent, but the movie really leans into it, which is, this is an examination of the casual cruelty of teenage boys, right? And that I had my own group like this. I had my own Dahmer fan club. I mean, it just turned out that the weirdos that me and my friends locked onto that were taking their pants off in school and running down the hallway and throwing garbage cans and being crazy didn't turn out to be serial killers, right? But it made me examine back upon myself, where I'm like, you know, we were all those guys that were like crazy, disruptive, mean-spirited, and we all thought we were so cool and so fucking edgy, right? And it was like, dude, yeah, you know, Johnny went and put on his little sister's, you know, fucking ballet costume and ran through the Blockbuster Video knocking over the kiosks. It was amazing. We got it on VHS, right? And I remember in high school, like, having a group of friends where that was the kind of shit that we did.
Sure.
And looking at this now and looking at it through the lens of, like, Derf and his group were making fun of Dahmer, and that creates its own friction later on.
Yeah, you wonder how genuine it is through the movie, because they do play with him, and like you wonder if they're trying to accept him, but like at the same time they're putting him in all the yearbook photos and stuff. But they also take him like fishing and shit like
but
that,
there's also something deeply wrong with him, and they're like, well, but he still is the clown, so we can get him to act out in these ways. By the end, where they kind of like have gotten used to each other, or like he's maybe drifted away. Like again, another switch. When they take him fishing, he kills that fish because now that he's gotten that attention, he's bored with it. What else can I do to get attention, right? So this stuff keeps evolving, and then he starts stealing booze, right? Once his friends start separating a little bit. And they're like, God, he smelled really drunk.
One of the
when
most asshole kids, too, I think it's Neil, ends up feeling the worst about it.
Yeah, he's the one who feels the most guilty.
When we get to this point where they're paying him to do the spaz thing in the mall.
Yeah.
Whoa, sad as fuck.
Very, very, very sad and very poignant. And you know what this might be a really weird comparison, but you know what I thought of the most is Kyle Kinane has this bit about how he can't watch skateboard videos anymore. Kyle Kinane's a comedian. Mm-hmm. If you haven't heard his stuff, go check it out. He's amazing.
Oh, so good.
But he has this bit about how he can't, now that he's almost 50, he can't watch skateboard videos anymore. He's like, because the tricks are still cool, but in all the videos, they start giving shit to the security guard. And I'm like, this guy, dude, he didn't get his pension. He's just trying to, or like, he's some sad old bastard that's like almost my age now. And, you know, he's like, I'm just like, leave him alone. He's just trying to, you know, he's a fucking security guard. Just leave him alone. Like, I know you think that you're being some badass, but like, he's not the man. He's a guy earning minimum wage. Leave him alone, right?
Totally.
And that's what I thought about watching this now, is that the movie is looking at the reckless radicalness of kids fucking being the jackass video guys. They're like breaking windows and doing all this stuff. Now through this lens of like, this person.
But now you're doing it with a serial killer.
Well, and this person's troubled.
This movie's basically Jackass with
a serial killer. Right? Well, and you're facilitating an antisocial behavior that ended up not being funny, but deeply tragic when you were able to go back and be like, that's because there was something wrong with this guy.
I guarantee Derf, especially knowing now that he was the creator of this whole world, that a lot of that shit is hard to live with.
Oh, yeah.
Like, reflecting back on how, one, they treated him, two, like, how nerve-wracking and scary it must have been when he was saying goodbye to him for the last time in his house by himself, where he invites him in for a beer.
Yep.
Whew!
And
intense.
And now here's an interesting thing. Two interesting things. One, the movie did move around a couple of small pieces. Derf actually didn't go with them when they went to D.C., but for the movie version, they put him into it.
But that's another example of him being charming, right? And talking his way into something, getting an interview with the vice president just randomly. Yeah.
But here's probably the most poignant thing here is that it was actually Neil that Dahmer got a ride home with. And it was Neil that Dahmer tried to invite into the house. Mm-hmm. And that actually, when they went back and compared dates, it was after he had murdered the hitchhiker, not before.
Oh. Well, I mean, he does have blood on his hands. Yep. In the car, at least.
So I think they moved the continuity because the ending makes more sense to be like, everybody graduated, they went off their own directions, and that was when he was finally free to be like, the house is empty, I can do what I want now.
I really like Alex Wolff. He's an awesome actor.
Oh, he's great, man. He's so
in,
solid.
Jumanji and
Hereditary, of course. Yeah.
Like, amazing. But like, Yeah, I like him on screen. He's really infectious.
I like he's an actor who like you like to watch his character thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of that here. The one last thing that I want to kind of say about that difference between the graphic novel is while the movie touches on it a little bit and it's a great sequence, the putting him into the yearbook sequence it is brilliant. It's brilliant and very funny. The way that it's handled in the graphic novel, however.
Oh, okay.
So first of all, the way it's handled by the teacher, blacking out the faces, right? Which is brilliant. And then you see that close-up of the faces blacked out, right? In the graphic novel, it stays with that longer. And it shows the actual photos in the graphic novel. It's not recreations that are drawn. It's the actual photos with his face blacked out,
printed out
in the yearbook.
They would rather do that.
Yeah, and it's so haunting to just see this black dot over it. And what Backderf writes is, it became the symbol of his wasted youth. His face blacked out, the boy who didn't belong.
Whoa.
So it kind of leans even further into it in the book.
That's fascinating.
And it's still very interesting and resonant in the movie.
Yeah.
But reading it for the first time gave me chills because I was like, yeah, you went to high school with Jeffrey Dahmer. And if you flip through all the club pictures, there's just this blacked out Sharpie mark. And it's like all of those are that guy who ended up killing all those people.
I bet that yearbook goes for $1,000 on eBay.
Oh my God. Probably more than that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I would say if it was less than $100, I might buy one. Just to see all the blacked out dots. I don't know.
Crazy. I think another lingering subplot here that, that we definitely need to talk about is just kind of the consistent dwindling of the household, right? Of his parents,
God, yes.
Of his parents constantly arguing, his mom just doing crazy shit and spending tons of money and just totally depressing this poor dad.
God.
And they end up getting divorced, and she doesn't even go to his graduation. Like
they're leaving and he just finds out as he's walking up. We're going to grandma's. And then that, what's the worst thing that could possibly
leave him alone
happen at that point is like leave him with an empty house, that whole empty house.
Well, yeah. And like, where's his dad? Like
staying at a apartment, a flop house apartment.
Yeah, so
down in the city.
So the drinking gets more and more out of control, and I think that had a huge part to do with like maybe his confidence and what he thought he could accomplish. For sure, we get the kid at the end who is Nix, right? Stephen Nix, his first Hicks. Okay, his first victim in 1981, taking him to a concert, or he's on his way to a concert. I think here he said he's leaving the concert in the movie, but I think the real story is that he was going to a concert and never came back. But anyways, wild movie. A lot more. I'd seen this before, and it was a lot more poignant this time. I think around knowing that Derf and that whole character is part of the story really changes it for me. Yeah. It is a good movie. When I first saw it, it wasn't anything that like necessarily stood out as being like some groundbreaking thing, but watching it again, I really enjoyed it. There's some really great haunting moments. The acting is awesome, and just kind of the eeriness of what everything is building up to is pretty fascinating, especially if you know the Dahmer story, which that happened. That's 40 years ago now. I know. Crazy to think about, but I remember it being a massive story when we were younger.
Well, and you're right, and I think that there is a poignancy to it that I got immediately, knowing that it's a true story, knowing that it's Backderf's story, and owning the book and being like, oh, they made a movie of it, and then seeing the trailer and going, oh, they made like a good movie of it, and so that really that made it so powerful to me when I saw it.
And I know I mentioned it at the beginning, but I think it's worth bringing up again. They shot in his childhood house. Yep, that's some poltergeist shit.
Yeah, it was like cursed film kind of a thing. Yeah,
like so much could happen. And I was reading an interview with Alex Wolff. He said it was one of the scariest moments of my career. Just trying to get ready, like things would move in the house, and there's all this eeriness that was happening.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I mean, I don't know. The fact that they were able to get it, one,
totally,
and two, really shot in it and like those recreations seem a lot more real now.
Totally.
That's the same fucking paint on the wall from when he was there 40 years ago.
Fuck. That's so creepy.
Yeah. Good move, though, if you can do it. And really,
Totally.
an interesting movie and fascinating, you know, I guess it's a coming of age story, but it's like not the kind you would normally think about.
No, it's a review back, right? It's a review back for Derf and his friends to be like.
And I'm sure there was good moments, and actually Lionel Dahmer talks about that in his book.
Yeah.
Because people only talk about the bad shit, and this movie definitely focuses on the foreshadowing of what he became for sure more, and probably didn't lean on the good moments as much. And that's a good point. So
it does muddy the water, though,
Yeah.
and I like that. I love when you can muddy the water about these, like the origin story of evil, and it's like, well, no, it's like it's a person with like severe mental illness that went unchecked, and they ended up doing horribly violent things because of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can go back and actually look at it and kick up that mud a little bit into the water, it makes for a fascinating character story.
Yeah. Really good movie, though. Great
Yeah.
pick for the Fast. Excited we did it. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Next week, we are going to come back with that one scene from Whiplash.
Yep.
Excited to get into that. After that, we're going to finish out the festival with Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Got to finish out with a bang.
Oh, yeah.
Bang, boom, pow. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. See you guys next time.